Thank you so much for joining as the first interviewee for our new Voices for Healthier Minds interview series.
Thank you for letting me pilot the new charted course.
So I'm Vincent Atchity. As you know, I'm President and CEO of Mental Health Colorado, and this is our new interview series. And today we have with us Jonathan Singer. Jonathan, in your current role, you are serving the people of Boulder as the Senior Director of Policy Programs for the Boulder Chamber, where you lead public policy initiatives focused on economic vitality, housing, workforce development, public safety, and community well-being. When I first met you, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, you were serving as Colorado State Representative, and at that time, already well established as a prominent health champion for your constituents and an ally to the People First mission of Mental Health Colorado. I know we could talk for hours, but we've got a half an hour. So we're going to get right into it. I've got some questions lined up, and we can just follow our train of conversation. But I figured I'd start off by asking you to please introduce yourself by telling us a little bit about your journey toward this life in public service that you've been leading. And, when you were a teenager, were you imagining being an elected official? Or what were the key moments or insights that led you to this?
Oh my gosh. No, thank you for having me. And it has been quite a journey, and I'm glad you've been part of it as well. I will tell you I certainly would have never imagined actually being senior director of policy for any chamber of commerce. But if it was going to be one, it would be Boulder. I grew up in Boston, but moved to Boulder right before high school, and was actually I was bit by the public service bug very early on, and I didn't necessarily think that elected office was something for me. I started volunteering early on in my high school career and actually worked on creating a youth center and a nonprofit at the age of 16 or 17, and started volunteering for the Boulder County Safe House at the same age, and was, like I said, bitten by that public service bug on both policy and also individual clinical work, really. And so I left the Boulder bubble to go to Colorado State University, where I got my master's in social work and my bachelor's in psychology and social work, and then spent really a career working on behalf of elders and child protective services, adult protective services, nursing homes, addiction treatment, and all the above, as well as welfare to work programs, at the same time that I was volunteering for causes that I cared about. And ultimately, the story I tell my colleagues is that as a social worker, I was banging my head against a wall, and I figured I could either continue doing that and do the valuable clinical work that was necessary, or I could run for office and get a sledgehammer and break through some of the barriers that were necessary to serve people. And so I was very fortunate to run for and serve in the State House from 2012 all the way through the end of 2020 before being able to take on this role. And so that's the last 25 years of my life in 5 minutes or less.
No, thank you so much. And I love that image of trading the head banging for a sledgehammer. I'm curious, what specific things were you bumping up against in that direct service?
A lot. I can give you so many examples, but there are so many places, even today, where our systems are not serving our most vulnerable. And ultimately, if we're not serving our most vulnerable, we're not really serving our community as a whole. And it doesn't serve anyone. And so examples range from in the welfare to work system. We saw people who weren't getting the supportive services they needed as it relates to everything from affordable housing, healthcare, childcare, behavioral health, mental health, and transportation. It really ran the gamut. And you saw the same thing in the child welfare system. You saw families that were struggling because of our economic inequities in our system where people were working harder and not getting as far as they needed to, or even slipping further behind. You saw deficits in our education system and complete unaffordability in early childhood education. And so I could keep going and going. But I joke, my first field placement as a graduate student or undergraduate in social work was working on affordable housing back around the turn of the century. We are 30 years into that, and we are still facing the same issues. And arguably, it's gotten harder and not easier. And so the work continues.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, the housing thing, we'll return to that persistent problem. Given our theme for our interview series and observing that you've worked in elected office and policy and community leadership, across those experiences, in a general kind of sense, what has convinced you that healthier minds are essential to healthier communities?
Oh, this is going to be a recurring theme, but health. First of all, the mind and the brain is part of the body. And when we talk about health, I think a lot of times we separate that two. We have this dualistic view, and really we need a holistic view. And healthier minds help. There's an old adage: if you don't have your health, what do you have? Right? You could be the richest person in the world. If you don't have your own well-being, it doesn't matter. And so, and the one thing that we've neglected, arguably more than anything, because of stigma and everything else, is the mind. And so this is a critical key linchpin to addressing our societal and individual needs.
Yeah, health is the greatest wealth. Yeah. So your portfolio now at the Chamber spans economic vitality, housing, workforce development, public safety, community well-being. What connects those issues? And how does Boulder's community experience help illuminate those connections for the rest of Colorado?
Oh my gosh. I mean, let's start with it's part of my job description, so that's what connects those issues. But why is it part of my job description is I think what you were getting at. It's interesting. We surveyed close to 1,000 businesses in Boulder, and we asked them, what are the most pressing issues that you are facing? And some of them I think you would sort of stereotypically come up with, right? We want a thriving startup economy. We want our workforce needs to be met with a successfully trained workforce. That inherently makes sense. Here's what we heard in addition to that, though, is we heard that public safety, chronic homelessness, transportation connections, middle-income housing, are all critical components of that. And they're all integrated, too. And we don't think about this enough. I'll give you two examples because, I want to be thoughtful about our time. But I met with a very successful medical office. And they're like, Jonathan, we're pulling up stakes, we're leaving. Okay, why? Do you not have enough patients? No, we have plenty of patients. But we don't have a workforce to support it. Well, why don't you have a workforce to support it? Well, they can get paid the same amount in Westminster that they can get paid in Boulder. And it turns out the average price of a 3-bedroom home is about $1.2 million. So they can choose to work here but live somewhere else, or they can choose to live somewhere else and work where they're living. This is not simple math, or this is simple math, right? This is not calculus. And so the equation is very simple in that sense. What we are working on doing is looking at the integration of these issues and bending that curve in a way that serves everybody, because it does serve our business interests. And here's the second example that I'll give you that gives a more successful look at this. When we combine affordable housing and transportation and meeting workforce needs and the public safety component, and you look at the conjunction of those, like let's just take homelessness, for example. If you're able to provide a system where people are easily able to get to the services that they need, they can be more job ready. And when they're more job ready, they're able to achieve a higher income. And when they're able to achieve a higher income, you're addressing some of the basic needs that are necessary that go back to everything from public safety to building a thriving, sustainable community. And as we start to look at the conjunction of those issues and address those globalistically, not just in those individual silos, you're actually creating a system that feeds upon itself in a positive way.
Mm. And just to harping on Boulder for a minute, I remember, doing statewide work in Colorado, and often people will remark, well, Boulder, that's not Colorado. And there's this kind of weird framing of Boulder as a distinct kind of thing. What kind of validity is there to that? Or what is invalid about it? What is true about it? What does Boulder contribute that other Coloradans need to appreciate?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. It's interesting. When I testify at the legislature now, I introduce myself and I say I'm with the Boulder Chamber of Commerce. And I look at one side of the aisle and I say, I know I lost you when I said Boulder. And I look at the other side of the aisle and I said, I know I lost you when I said Chamber of Commerce. And so what does that mean? That maybe there's more validity to both of those concepts that we need to think about. But also, Boulder is its own unique egg. We are so fortunate to have the university here, to have a research, R1 level research institution in our backyard. And so we've got incredible minds. We also have so many startups and so many phenomenal innovative industries that are well entrenched and well serviced. And also we have an incredibly high cost of living. And we also are literally a bubble because of the green belt and the open space that we've valued, that we've created. So when people look and see, our flat irons, they can look and see our flat irons. And to a certain degree, we are successful in so many ways and victims of our own success in so many ways. We've created this beautiful, highly educated bubble that needs to and is working on becoming more welcoming and more affordable, so it can continue to be the community that it aspired to be, which is one where we are open to new ideas and are a little bit weird sometimes, but also a place that is wants to be including of new things. When you think about an international film festival, Sundance, if I told you 2 years ago that we would be hosting the premier international independent film festival, you might go, well, that kind of fits in with Boulder, but how are you going to do it? Well, it's because people were inspired and put all hands on deck. And we put our mind to something, we can do it. And so what the next moonshot is, I can't tell you, but we are unique, we are weird, we are exciting and innovative, and we are working to be more inclusive in a place that still requires a high cost of living to be able to have a sustainable existence here.
No, great answer. Thank you so much. So switching back to your work as state representative, how did behavioral health and the state's efforts to create a behavioral health system come to the forefront for you as a lawmaker?
It was a no-brainer for me. I mean, I came from that world. The biggest difference between when I started in 2012 to where we are today is the fact that I had a full head of hair then. The second biggest difference, there were some battle scars there. But very early on, there was this recognition on both sides of the aisle for many reasons that it was fiscally imprudent and a moral imperative to address behavioral mental health because of the overwhelming number of people in our criminal legal system that were struggling with the lack of access to critical services as it related to those things, and with an understanding that our behavioral mental health providers, our largest inpatient provider, was our jails and our prisons. And everyone now looks at me and goes, yeah, that's correct. There are very few people that are shocked by that. The new challenge, whether you're from the Koch brothers right-wing side, where you believe in individual freedom, personal freedom, and fiscal responsibility, or whether you're from the left-wing side of the aisle and you believe that every person deserves certain basic services that are inherent human rights, this is the conjunction of those two things for the most part. And people looked at me at the time and were like, well, Jonathan, you're a social worker. Go make this work, right? And I said, both are probably true, but I'm going to need some help. And we were very fortunate to have pro-business Democrats and Republicans working with former public health nurses and other practitioners who were in elected office or are in elected office that saw the need, the requirement, and the value of doing the work. And we were so successful on many components, but and at the same time, like I said before, the work continues.
Right here, we still are. Yep. I'm always thinking about the terms we use, and we talk about behavioral health in our policy settings, and that's a familiar term for many, but I worry that it's lost on many. What do you think we gain from framing things in terms of behavioral health, and what are we obscuring by that or losing in terms of connecting with people?
Words matter. And I don't know if we'll ever have exactly the right words to describe what we need to describe. I think about the term behavioral health even, and it has a very unique connotation in it. And also there's a lot of people that don't know really what that means. And they might even have a negative connotation associated with it. They might think, well, does that mean that some people have good behavior and some people have bad behavior, right? And if you're exhibiting poor, if you're struggling with a mental health issue, that means you have poor behavioral health. That's not where we need to be. Stigma is arguably the most dangerous part of changing the perceptions around this. As I said before, looking at this in a holistic, globalistic way, looking at health in those terms. But if we think about where we started in this world, the Greeks talked about hysteria and hysterical, and it has its own sexist connotations, right? We talk about post-traumatic stress and how originally in World War I, it was called shell shock, right? And we've moved, went from shell shock to PTSD using the word disorder, and now trying to take away the word disorder. Ultimately, what we're talking about is wellness. And one of my colleagues mentioned this, and it was is Representative Wilson, who's Republican from Salida, Colorado, school superintendent down there. And he said, if I went to work tomorrow and someone asked me how my weekend was, and I said, oh gosh, I went skiing, I broke my leg, and I just got back from the hospital, and people be like, oh my God, are you okay? Like, do you need to take the week off? Do you need rehab? Do you need, what can I do to support you in this time, right? Like, do we need to get you a different desk? Do you want to work from home for a little bit? At the same time, if I came to work on Monday and someone asked me how my weekend was, and I said, my medication wasn't working out as I expected. I started hallucinating, and I was taken to the hospital, and they stabilized me, and I'm doing better now. And I got to follow up in about a week or so, just to make sure that the new medication I'm taking is working the way it's supposed to. I think people would approach it I know people would approach it very differently. And this is our challenge, is to be able to look at those two situations in similar veins and be able to go into workplaces and in our individual social lives and say that behavioral health is health. And I don't care what word we use as long as we're eliminating the stigma.
Yeah. What do you think, just to unpack that a little bit for the sake of conversation, why is it our tendency to respond so differently to an experience of medication failure and hallucination versus breaking a leg and needing some physical therapy?
Well, if I had the complete right answer for that one,
Yeah.
we could write a book and be done with this
Yeah.
and be there. Um, it's a really good question. I think, it has its roots in many places, but one of it is it is something that is invisible. It's not tangible. If I break a leg, even if I have cancer, right? I can look under a microscope or I can look at a blood test, be like, here are the cancer cells, here's the chemotherapy, here's the radiation. It's very tangible. The
Mm.
unknown is scary, right? And to the degree that we've been able to quantify mental health within the concepts of serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and all these other terms is helpful. But there is this broader, unknown existential component that is not tangible and may never be fully tangible. And that, I think, is our challenge in a world where we are still defined in very concrete scientific terms in the society.
Yeah.
And how we change that is by talking about it.
Yeah. I think existential is a good word, and it really strikes at our sense of self and our sense of identity or something. And it's one thing to react empathetically with somebody who's broken a leg, and we can put ourselves there and not feel, like our identity is being assailed by the experience of having a broken leg or something like that. But the other experience of hallucinating and that kind of a condition is alarming. It's alarming in a way that a broken leg is not alarming, perhaps, to our sense of
And
to
look,
our existential sensibility.
and it's like I said, I don't think you change a society in a moment. I mean, you look at other communities and other populations worldwide, and they would look at what we would call schizoaffective disorder in positive terms, even, and say, okay, these are visionaries. These are, and it's not to say that one society is better than the other, but it's how it's envisioned.
Yeah.
And I think we're making progress. We don't stick ice picks in people's eyes anymore to address behavioral health issues. And it's a stark term, but it's reality as well.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. It's how we respond. It's making a little bit of progress, but we're not there yet, right? So just to get some more storytelling out of you. So over your years of service, you've met countless Coloradans. Are there particular conversations or encounters that stand out in terms of how they changed your way of thinking about health and well-being?
So many. I mean,
Yeah.
so many. I'll say, I'll start with this actually. Like you asked how I got my start. I remember working with I was in a welfare to work program for Denver County, and we were so focused on getting the paperwork right. And I remember this one person, they had a family member who died, but they had to keep up with federal work requirements. And I was being judged as an employee on whether or not this person was keeping up with those requirements. And they were like, why do I have to do all these things? My, mom just died. And I'm like, I understand. And here's what's going on for me because of the rules that I need to follow that are set by law. And and it's my job. And they're like, well, why do you have this job then? Because it sounds like you don't like it. And
Mm.
I'm like, you're right. The work I'm doing is important, but the job I have, I don't. Um, I think the other thing that the committee testimony that I heard was some of the most powerful, moving things and some of the most important. Um, I'm not going to name names, but there was one lawmaker who started out in the Health and Human Services Committee. He was brand new, Western rural Republican. He would always ask the same question, actually, and it wasn't annoying. It was important, but like, well, how does this affect Western Colorado, right? And you would hear these just genuinely heartbreaking stories. We ran our committee budget for Kleenex ran out in the first week.
Mm,
Stories of abusive parents who threw away their kids' medication as a form of punishment.
mm,
Um, Kids who literally had to walk miles because they knew they needed mental health care, and they knew that their family wasn't going to do something about it, and they were motivated enough to take care of themselves that they would take it upon themselves to literally walk miles to find the care that they needed. And ultimately, this lawmaker pulled me aside probably about a month into it and said, you know, Jonathan, I ran to focus in agriculture and water.
mm.
Okay, thanks. He goes, this committee on health and human services, this is the work that we were meant to do.
Wow.
And it's, you know, I have one other story if you want to hear it.
Yeah, please. No, that's a great story. Yeah.
But I mean, it still brings tears to my
Yeah, no,
eyes
I'm
to
serious.
hear that. And it's because people show, it's not because, oh, Jonathan Singer, the well-meaning social worker turned lawmaker, did this. It was the stories of people who showed up, and I had heard those stories. They had not, because they're a farmer who lived in the
Right.
middle of nowhere, right? The last one that was particularly moving, this is when the Affordable Care Act was on life support at the federal level, and I was part of a legislative delegation from across the country that was coming to the U.S. Senate Finance Committee staff to say this you can't repeal it, guys. Now, this is during the Trump one administration, and once again, as a Boulder County lawmaker, I might have lost on 2 counts as opposed to 1, but I had knowledge and expertise. My colleague was a Republican state senator, Dave Heaton from Iowa. And we're going over numbers. We're sitting with Senate staff. And eventually, he is so exasperated. And he said, look, Medicaid is supposed to cover our elders, disabled, kids. If you make these cuts, which of those 3 do you want me to cut? And I don't mean to get religious here, but like, isn't this what we were put on earth by God to protect? Cue the West Wing music. Like,
Amen.
seriously,
Yeah.
I'm just like, am I sitting here right now listening to this? And it was a moral and religious imperative. And I can't say that we broke through that day. But those elements, those stories that put chinks in the armor of injustice, stick with you.
Yeah. No, thank you. Excellent stories. We're going to run out of time. So let me just say, given the budget realities we're facing, where should Coloradans be focusing our attention if we want to help create healthier minds and healthier communities over the next decade?
You know what? It's going to have to happen on every level. It's going to have, the state legislature created the ability of local communities to create these mental health special districts. It's just like we have recreation districts, just like we have parks districts. I encourage local communities to examine that opportunity and think about those things. I think the next big thing is really also advocacy. There's eventually you can only squeeze so much blood from a stone. And so fundamentally, we need to ask ourselves, not only where are we prioritizing our funds, but in a world with inflation and things getting more expensive and our own systemic problems here in Colorado with things like Tabor constricting our budget artificially in a place where communities have said, you know what, my school district doesn't need to abide by the same rules that the state does on these things. We need to start untangling those fiscal thickets, if you can say that 10 times fast. But we need to start untangling those fiscal thickets and talk about how do we want to fund things better, knowing what we know now. I can't imagine what it's like to be a kid or a teenager in today's society where you cannot turn off easily the bombardment of challenges. And now with artificial intelligence creating that new extra layer beyond social media, it is a community imperative that we address these at every level of government and that we speak truth to power, just like that Republican state senator did, to say, you know what, this is what we were put on earth to protect, and it is a moral and fiscal imperative that this is part of our infrastructure. We fill in potholes. We also address our health on every single level. And so this is about advocacy and doing the work where it's most meaningful to you as an individual.
Thank you so much. All right, so to make sure we're ending things on a positive note, tell us something you're hopeful about, given the bombardment of things to be worried about.
Well, first of all, I think the dialogue is changing, and we are more accepting on many levels than we ever have been. And what is hopeful is frankly, it's groups like Mental Health Colorado. It's not, I don't mean that to turn it into an infomercial, but it's community groups across the state and the nation that has tapped into this overwhelming understanding that is creating community. And now you're seeing groups like the Boulder Chamber of Commerce working with more left-wing side of the aisle groups like Together Colorado to say that we are turning mental health into a priority and we are putting words into action. And that is exciting. And it's very specifically the voters passed attacks on mental health here in Colorado, in Boulder County. And now we have a primed group of folks from across the spectrum that are excited about figuring out how do we create this long-term sustainable funding mechanism to address the needs of our kids, our elders, and the broader community.
Great. So not to put you on the spot too much, but what's one action somebody could do tomorrow to help move this in the right direction and be part of the change that needs to happen?
Well, I would always start by hydrating.
Excellent.
Treat yourself well. Treat yourself well. Like, I am a very action-oriented person, but if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't take care of others. So start by hydrating. I may have forgotten to do that when I grabbed my coffee this morning. And then second of all, the second thing I would do is ask yourself, have I checked in with, brainwaves? Have I checked in with my local community and then you said one thing, when you ask someone how they're doing, don't make it how are you? Oh, I'm doing fine. Like, listen, it takes 30 seconds, but if we start to value each other as people, we can start to get to the most important parts of these conversations.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jonathan, for being such a powerful voice for healthier minds. Thank you so much for joining us today for our first interview.
Well, thank you for having me. And I look forward to hearing from your other smarter, more inspiring people, as I hope I set the bar low so we can really just go over it.
A very tough act to follow.